Good morning. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Cyber Confidential. And good to see you, Joe, Vitaly, and Jim. Everybody's good?
Hey,
Great to be here.
All right. So I've spoken to all of you individually, and today is the first time we all four of us are together. So fun to see you on screen. And from different places around the world. So we'll start the first episode as the role of the CISO and how it will evolve in your opinions based on your experiences. And we'll just go roll with that. So the first question, Joe, you sent me this new proposed bill yesterday, which was super interesting. So it's a Senate proposed bill for the healthcare industry, for healthcare providers and other related parties where they're going to handle patient and customer data. So there are a number of things that really caught my attention. The first thing is that the Department of Health and Human Services will impose a minimum set of security standards. But they didn't talk about what that is, right? I guess they will develop that. Joe or anybody else, do you guys have any reading on what those minimum set of standards going to be?
well, I think this is where every bill like that gets bogged down, is in the question of what the minimum standard should be. And the last thing any of us wants is another watered down standard to go next to a bunch of other watered down standards that already exist. And nor do we want to be on the committee that gets to debate those watered down standards. And I think the Biden administration already has a big initiative to try and respond to a lot of our feedback, which has been we would like less standards and more consistency between the standards. Because if you work at a company that sells into the federal government, you find out that you have to meet different standards to sell into different parts of the federal government, for example, and that's really frustrating.
Yeah, I see this, I sit on the board of a public company, and my CISO has to look at the TSA standards, has to look at the CISA, and then we have the energy industry security standards. It's a lot.
Yeah, but I think that for all of us, thinking about this bill from the role of the security executive, the most important thing is not, kind of what standard they settle on. It's where they're trying to shift accountability to.
Sure.
I see Jim's nodding his head because, if we go back and look at the way the Senate has approached the Change Healthcare saga, if you will, the first thing they did was focus on having the CEO come testify. They criticized the head of security in their public letter. I think Senator Wyden's office did, but for not having a prior background in cybersecurity. But most importantly, in this bill, it says, like we see in Sarbanes-Oxley, the CEO should have to sign off on the security commitments.
They said the top executive, right? So CEO, and did they name CISO as well? I didn't read the actual text. I read the summary.
Yes, so in the text it does say the CISO or equivalent, because as we know, not everybody has the same title, and not even people who have the same title have the actual same job.
It's just Health and Human Services, hospitals, correct, for now? Or is it broader?
It's just them for now.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great start, just to be clear, because ransomware has been cutting through smaller hospitals in rural America and shutting them down. And it's literally hurting, if not worse, people, the end user, which is why we're here, why we have these jobs, is to defend them. It also, I briefly went through the bill, but I didn't digest it fully. But it seems that it also focuses on, an unlimited cap on the companies that fail to provide these services, which is fine. But also, I think that there needs to be a measure for the smaller hospitals to actually get financial aid when they're taken out. Because
So they talk about that bill talks about help, financial help actually for the smaller hospitals
Good.
and healthcare facilities. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was in DC at a place when a hospital got hit, like literally as I was talking to this group of people, and they were struggling, like, what powers or authorities do we have to save this hospital because they're going to go under? Because they're locked up, they don't have cyber insurance or enough, and they're going to have to shut the hospital down, quite literally that day. And so people were running around trying to figure out how to help this hospital that was in the middle of nowhere and services a lot of people in need.
So
yeah,
what do you
one
guys
of the
think
concerns I have, and I think Joe covered it a little bit, which is, I think it was called out somewhere there in the text, supports department security oversight and enforcement. Now we're going to have to deal with another oversight committee, another regulation, right? So there needs to be more consistency around, call it regulated industries or critical infrastructure, and you probably should consider this industry as critical infrastructure for us. That's going to be the biggest challenge for us, right? That's a lot of overhead for executives, CISOs to manage through. If you look at financial SOX compliance, for example, there's only one process, right? It sucks, unless you're in the financial industry, which is very different, right? But here we have to worry about CISO, we have to worry about health department now, we have to worry about SEC, and every single one of them have different requirements and a different way that the oversight and enforcement works. So I think the idea is good. We need something. We need some level of light regulation. We just need more consistency.
I mean,
so we don't get crushed by the regulatory weight.
I think the argument here, like the pros and cons of, like, do we want a dream regulation that, like, is consistent across all industries and simplifies it for all of us? Yes, but on the flip side, we got to start somewhere, and I think I agree with Jim that, like, healthcare is suffering from attacks more than any other industry. And I personally think that the reason they're suffering is because they've invested less. If you look at financial services, they have had the regulatory oversight, from 17 different regulators, and so they're like, I can't quote people because they don't want to be quoted on this, but in the financial services industry, like, typically their security budgets are like 10% of tech spend, and what I've been told in healthcare is it's closer to 5% of technology spend. And so if you're literally spending half as much money, it's no wonder you have such poor outcomes. And it's not the healthcare companies that are suffering, it's the people who need the healthcare services right now.
And what is so what do you guys think of the stipulation that CISO has to sign off on the compliance, right? To attest that you're compliant. And this is an annual thing. I think the financial sign off is quarterly, right? You have to sign off the financial statement every quarter. So my CFO does that in that public company, and the CEO then signs off as well. So this is once a year, right? But it's moving in the right direction. Somebody has to publicly say, yes, we've looked at this, we think has merit. Do you guys like this? Do you hate this? Or what do you think?
I mean, I think it would be a bad thing if it didn't say that the CEO also has to sign off on it. But I think with the CEO also having to sign off, and the other requirement that there be an independent outside audit,
right.
I think if you add those two things, the last thing we want to do is push the security executive into standing alone with more risk on them. What we want to do is have the rest of the organization have to come along on that journey, because the CFO doesn't stand alone.
That's right. CFO signs this financial statement, and the CEO says, yes, I also sign off.
I personally think that if we can get to I have all the support in the world that I need from my CFO and my CEO, but I'm lucky, right? They understand the problem. I never have to argue about funding, but I'm also I don't ask for the world every time I go before them. I'm practical. But for other companies like these hospitals, I think it's really important to have consistency and accountability, because what that happens is, even if the actual law doesn't fix the thing you need, it pushes regulators into that space. It pushes the need for compliance into that space, and it starts to naturally build a framework where the CISO is now accountable, as is the CEO, but it's also like the CFO, it's regulated. And I rarely say we need to regulate things, but on this one, I think that there needs to be more regulation and accountability for information security as an officer and how it relates to the other executives on any given company.
I mean, Cheng-Chi, can I throw it back at you as someone who sees how venture spends money? If there's more structure and kind of enforcement brought into cyber and more mandatory spend, does that help drive investment?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm already, last night the bill came, you sent the email, and I already sent it out to a few of my CEOs. I said, look, you guys do business with the healthcare industry, right? How is that going to impact your go-to-market, your product strategies and everything? Yeah, absolutely. So from a pure sort of selfish point of view, don't type. Who's typing? Somebody's typing.
We're moving so fast, we got to take notes.
From pure selfish point of view, I love it. But you know, this is again, to your point, Jim, and Vitaly, you guys talked about. There's many different regulations, many different policies you have to abide by, and that is a problem. I've spoken to some of the government agencies like CISA, right, about this, and like Kristen, for instance, works for Jen, and they recognize it's a problem, but they also don't know what to do about it.
Well, we talked about this at the Cyber Summit a bit too, and I was listening to a lot of great people representing regulators and things of that nature, and I was the only CISO in the room, and so I spoke up and I said, look, I have 50 states I have to deal with, and then I have federal regulators, and then I have Europeans, and then I have Japan, Australia. Which do you want me to adhere to? Because they all tell me something else. And if you end up, God forbid, filing an 8K and have to go report, you have to report at least 50 times, because it's not just the 8K. You have to tell all the states. Because remember that privacy is the ultimate end of security. So they walk hand in hand. When security fails, privacy is violated. And there's been a lot of regulation around that. But, I think that NIST 2 in Europe might help as well. I've used that to get, some funding. Because it's something that we're going to have to chase, like GDPR. I'm sorry, I keep getting these spam calls. Can we talk about spam callers for a bit, maybe? Probably. Ollie?
So, I mean, Vitaly, you have the same thing. You have customers, users all over the world, right? And how do you think about this varying landscape of regulations that's getting more and more serious?
I mean, we have a really strong policy team that we work very closely with. We have a really good legal team globally that we have to engage with. But it is complex, right? It's new in India. The bar for disclosure is very different than it is here in US. If you go to Australia, as Jim said, another bar. So trying to keep an eye and understand where we have to report on what is the controls we have to put in place based on whether it's regulatory risk or other risks, varies. So to try to stay up on the top of that on a regular basis is challenging. You have to update your run books regularly on the incident management side, right? Because of the disclosure requirements differ from country to country or industry and into industry. So this is where I think the opportunity to engage and work closer with the government in all the different countries and the policy teams is very critical for CISOs, right? That's kind of a new, for a lot of us, it's kind of a new skill that maybe we didn't have to worry about before. Engaging with the government, engaging with
you guys do that? I mean, you don't have to say which government you work with, but you engage with different governments and work on cyber regulations or reporting structures.
Absolutely.
100%. in my time at, as the CSO at Facebook/Meta and Uber and Cloudflare, I mean, I testified before Congress about legislation and privacy and security, and I testified in the European Commission and probably, from China to Australia and everywhere in between. It's when you're at the companies like Vitaly and Jim are at, there's an expectation. And in fact, we should want that. Too much of the time, cyber regulation doesn't have enough people. Like Jim said at his event, he was the only security executive in the room. So he was there representing every single security executive. And we're the ones who live in the weeds of dealing with these issues, and we're the best ones to actually help articulate the risk to people and the technological controls that would help. So we are learning how to communicate with those regulators and talk about cybersecurity. But we also need to also step back and think about it from the business standpoint. Like when a company, like the companies that we've all worked at, when they expand to a new country, they accept the cost of, the people in this country speak a different language, so we were going to have to, redo all of our content for this audience. But for some reason, the business people look at the regulatory side of it and think, if I could just get around that cost, I could make more money. And we have to get them to understand that, when you go into a new market, you automatically bring complexity in multiple contexts, and the expectations around cybersecurity is another one of them, where the rules are different everywhere. And it's a cost of doing business that we have to accept and not ignore, or the people get hurt.
So let me take this slightly different direction, because one of the things we talked about, all three of us talked about, is the role of CISO. And we just talked about the importance of working with authorities at different countries, which is very important. But that's a very different role than like talking to a malware analyst, being head of security engineering, being very technical, and being a good communicator, talk to customers and other departments. So how can one person do all that, right? And you are being asked to be everywhere and everyone at once. Is that the title of the movie? And can you do it? And how can anyone do it?
So I think the answer is yes, we can do it. I remember a long time ago, I worked with a woman named Susan who is my finance business partner at Facebook. She's the CFO there now. So she went from being, someone who was working their way up in the finance department to CFO of one of the biggest companies on the planet. And the way that people make that journey is through mentoring and support and development and exposure to different angles of the role over time. I just think as a profession, we haven't done as good a job as some other professions at creating that clear mentorship path and development for people. We're starting to get there, but we still have a long way to go.
I see it as I've trained current CISOs that have gone out there because, I have this kind of snarky line, which is, we're all in this together and no one's getting out alive, right? And, in life in general. And when you take a leader and help them grow and they become CISO at another company, you end up one way or another being dependent on that company because we're all intertwined. So there's a kind of this, John Nash component overlap of the needs of the individual and the needs of the many circling over each other.
Where do you train them? Is there a school that you
Front lines, dude. Front lines. Every time. 100%. I kick them make them go to conferences. I make them go talk to people. I make them deal with incidents. I transfer their duties into having to deal with compliance. You need to have that full breadth, and you need to be in the weeds, and you need to be scarred. You need to have been through incidents and looked into the abyss going, I have no idea how to get out of here. That's sorry.
That's where team operates usually, is this abyss.
Look into the eyes of the incident like the eyes of the Sauron, and then you come out the other side alive.
Yeah.
But that's true, right? That's kind of where you learn things. You can
Yes.
get some level of cyber education, right, in universities, at schools, and I think that's needed, and we need to do more and invest more. But the real learnings you get on the job when you are on the middle of incident, when you're working in the war room, where you have to work with regulators or legal or policy to understand the compliance requirements, and to be a successful CISO. You mentioned that, Jing. So you have to not only be a great storyteller, you have to be very technical in many areas and broad technical understanding of all the different domains. You have to understand legal requirements. You have to understand regulators, policy, and it's one of the probably small number of roles in any company where it has to be that broad. You also have to understand financials, right? You have to understand the budgets, OPEX, CAPEX, right? A lot of things that maybe in other roles you don't have a requirement to be good at. Here you have to be not just good, you almost have to be great in every single domain you deal in, or we'll die.
But I don't think learning on the job is that efficient. I mean, I've seen a lot of people who, learn on the job. They're really good at certain things, but they are not being exposed to other aspects of being a CISO, right? They're not asked to go present in front of customers. They're not asked to work with legal, or because they're maybe earlier part of their career. And I look at some of them, and I feel like a more intentional program that helps them learn these aspects of skills might be better. Do we have something like that for the industry?
Yes, the Jim Higgins Survival CISO Camp in Colorado.
No, Chengxi, I 100% agree with you that it would be much better if we had the more structured development mid-career for people who want to go become a security executive. But in the absence of that, I 100% agree with Vitaly and Jim. The reality of working your way up in security forces you to adapt and deal with all kinds of crazy situations. And the bottom line is, it's a weeding out process. There are lots of people who aren't able to work their way through it and get to the top. I remember one of the leaders I inherited at a company I thought was great until we had an incident. And then I realized that person could never be in the room during an incident, which meant that person could never be over the team that handles incidents. And so that was their career cap. They were great at a lot of other stuff, but I could not put them in that role. And so, for better or worse, we do have some, kind of process of pushing people up. I mean, partially it's next person up in those situations. You kind of turn and who's not going to freeze under the pressure of this situation? Because there's a lot.
Tabletop exercises actually do surface this because you're forced with these, Star Trek reference, Kobayashi Maru's, where it's an unsolvable problem, and it's really about testing decision making and character and whatnot. Matter of fact, this is how I interview people. And I've seen really interesting decisions come out of these exercises from non-security leaders and leaders that really helps not only on just the security decision making, we have a compromise and they're in our email and our chat. Okay, shut down email and chat. Well, you just shut down all communication between the detection and response teams. So compromise comms are okay in an incident. You just got to be faster than the attackers. But there's also the policy and the comms people that have to talk to the press and all of these things. I find them very important and very, I used to be cynical about them, but I have seen them, when well done, be a great, exercise.
Chancy, one of the things you mentioned earlier is it possible to get exposed to all this on the job, right, and just learn it? And the answer is probably not across all domains. And this is where it's actually our job to ensure that we actually give people those opportunities to learn, right, and get them engaged. And in many areas, it's going to be challenging for somebody in a short period of time to get exposed to every single domain, every opportunity. But that's where it's our job from a mentorship, championship point of view. We need to give those opportunities to all of our leaders, right, to step up and learn how to fail, honestly, in many of those areas.
Yeah. I guess what Joe said is weeding out process makes sense. But I guess they should just be people should be exposed to different things so that weeding
Yeah.
out process can happen, right? I also have an interesting observation. Recently, I have a friend of mine who's a CISO and who is engaged in a conversation for a next CISO job with a very large tech company. And they had her sit through, conversations with engineering team and with a lot of technical conversations where she sees the job is expecting her to be head of security engineering. And she came back to me and she said, "This is odd," she said, "because I don't see the industry moving that way. I see the industry moving to CISO being more of a influencer, more of a policy maker, and not a technical person." That's her opinion.
But you gotta be both.
Yeah. So this is a fundamental debate that I see happening. I help a lot of companies on their process of hiring a security executive or evaluating whether they should keep the executive they have, or should that person get mentoring, or do they need to find? Because oftentimes it's a company on the cusp of an IPO or something like that, and every single time we'll bring in the really good candidates first, and we feel like we end up burning those candidates because the company doesn't know what they want.
Right.
And this is the thing: most companies don't know what they want. I think the truth is that the role is different at different companies. We're speaking about the role at a public company that's a global technology-first organization. In that type of organization, you do have to have some technical depth. You have to be able to go into that meeting with the head of product and the head of engineering and debate with them which path you're going to go from a technology standpoint. And if you can't show up and do that, you're doing your team a disservice. So you have to have that level of technical capability. And so at the same time, you have to be able to do all the policy stuff and the financial stuff that we've been talking about. At different stages, a company can have a less developed and mature, experienced person, but we do have to have all of those skills at these top leadership roles at these top organizations, whether we like it or not. But the flip side of it is, what I worry is that person kind of like gets discouraged and walks away from applying for these types of roles, and especially because you said a she. I want that person to know that like they probably can do the role, and there are paths for them to develop the expertise they need to, because I remember when I was interviewing for the CSO role at Uber, one of the interviewers wanted me to kind of break down the encryption handshake in a particular context. And I looked at them and I said, "You're asking me the wrong question." I was like, "I'm not going to answer that question because if you think that that's what I'm going to do when I get here, you don't understand my job." And the person was just like, "What?" Well, then, then he said, "Well, what do you think your job should be?" And, but you have to have the comfort to be like, okay, that's going to a technical level that like this role shouldn't. But, I sometimes might have to go in and argue about that in an actual business meeting, but I would have 2 hours with my team in advance to make sure I understand all the pros and cons and the technical nuances before I would go into the actual substantive meeting with the head of product.
So you don't know the HTTPS handshake?
We should talk about the interviews that we went through, Jim.
Well, maybe Joe doesn't have to sit through another interview anymore to go through these, but he.
Hey, I stopped being a CSO 2 years ago. The bar has raised since then.
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
But there is some truth to that, right? Depending on which industry you're in and which company, a lot of times companies don't know what they're looking for or what good CISO looks like, right? They know based on what their experience been within their own company. But even the kind of traditional brick and mortar industries, you still need to be technical enough to understand what you're trying to solve for, right? You don't have to have hands-on keyboard, you don't have to write code in Python or actually program signals yourself or break down encryption handshake, right? But you have to understand what it actually means, at least on a high level.
Yeah.
And almost in any company now, like we were talking about healthcare earlier, even there where there might be 10 to 15 years behind in some ways on the infrastructure side, you still have to understand it and to be able to translate that. Where I see big swing in the last probably 5 years, we kind of went from a lot of CISO being risk professionals to more technology professionals, especially kind of in the FANG Plus area. And now we're starting to see GRC come back and being one of the, I would say requirements, but you need to understand the GRC space very well, regardless whether it's a highly technical role or not. Same thing with policy, legal, right? And that's where all of us have strengths and weaknesses. We're not going to be super strong in every area, but you have to have enough baseline in every domain to be able to succeed.
I see
Right.
people calling CISO now moving to risk executives. Is that what you're seeing?
Look, I don't even know if we're supposed to call it CISO or CISO or CISO. Like, I hear different things everywhere, and I've for some reason spent a bunch of time over in Europe recently, and the way that big European companies are thinking about it is slightly different from the way we're talking about it here too. It definitely kind of bends more towards focused on the compliance side over there, because I think they have clearer regulation too. So it's I think that we tend to look at it from inside our profession, and we should probably look at it from the seat of the CEO or the seat of the board. And I think that the profession is moving towards being bigger than the title CISO. I think that we didn't. I think a lot of professionals who have the CISO role did not step up and take on privacy in their organization, and I bet you they wish that they had, because for me, GDPR was like the greatest tool for getting resources to find all the data and figure out who had access to it. And that was a really, like Jim said earlier, privacy is best friends with security in terms of driving the changes we want. And with the artificial intelligence risks coming along, those don't fit neatly into the cybersecurity category.
Which is what I wanted to bring up, is I'm curious what people's thoughts are. People confuse AI safety and AI security, right? And they say we need AI security, but they're actually talking about AI safety. How do we prevent AI from making mistakes? How do we prevent output from causing worse things to happen, so on and so forth? And I'm specifically talking about Gen AI. And so I go around and I ask other CISOs, do you have to deal with this, and where should it live? It's like the AI safety aspect, it almost requires a whole new area for people to deal with. It's I'm just going to secure it, and I'm going to make sure it's private. But if you want me to increase quality and safety and things like that, that's not my field of expertise, but I'll do my best.
But I think you should. If I were you, I'd step up and say,
well, that's what I'm doing now.
But see, this is a unique group in that probably everyone here has been responsible for customer experience in their role. There are a great many security executives who live 100% over in enterprise land and just focus on, I'm securing the enterprise. We've all worked at companies that have customer-facing products and the customers are interacting with the organization through technology. And so we've all had to think about the customer experience, customer being consumers, citizens, end users. And so AI is forcing more security executives to cross over that chasm into user land. And most of them haven't ever done it before, and it's really scary. But working at the type of companies we had, it was just part of our daily existence to always think about end user multi-factor authentication, end user safety experience, end users harassing each other in forums, all the different things we would get sucked into. I don't want to remember the kind of stuff that Jim has to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, but you see this trend lately, right? A lot of, Joe, you talked about different titles, CISO, CSO, CISO, but you're starting to see more and more kind of chief trust officer come into play, and a lot of CISOs actually kind of graduating, you can say, or moving into that role, because you have to start thinking broader than just security. There's privacy components, there's trust and safety. Gen AI is no different. I mean, there's a lot of problems and opportunities there, but it's just still part of the trust and safety umbrella, right? Whether you look at security, safety,
Yep.
trust components, whether it's fraud, it's all under that umbrella now, and a lot of us are starting to work in that space more and more. Whether you're completely responsible and accountable, it probably will depend on the company, but we're all engaged in having those conversations.
So a lot of the, I was actually counseling a woman security professional that she has been a CISO in a smaller organization in the past few years and always on the enterprise security side. And now she's been offered a job at a slightly larger organization, would include product security, customer facing security responsibilities. And she was very worried that whether she could do it. And I said, if I were you, I take it with both hands, because you want that
100%.
product security experience, and I hope she will. But I had a point with that story.
Moving from the enterprise into larger role, yeah.
Yeah.
But the larger point is like the CISO responsibility may include certain slices that are, product security is a slice, the corporate enterprise security, safety trust is another slice, maybe regulatory compliance is another slice. So that comes back to what I wanted to discuss with you as a larger topic, is codifying the scope of a CISO. Do you think it's possible to actually codify, have a standard framework?
Yes, but I started to make this point earlier, and I think I forgot it. I was saying we have to think about the role from the perspective of the CEO and the board. The CEO does not want to turn to their side and say, okay, I need a privacy leader, I need a security leader, I need an AI leader, I need a trust and safety leader. Great, I'm going to hire 5 people to do those 5 roles or whatever. They want one, like when you were saying, is risk the right title? Well, all of those fit in the bucket of digital risk or technology risk. It's all the downside of technology, and and so you have a CTO and a head of product and a CIO, and all of them are trying to get the upside of technology. This, in the same way that the CEO turns to one person to oversee all the legal risk and one person to see over all the financial risk, they don't want 5 different leaders. They want to build a relationship with one person who understands the business. And I think to your point, Chengxi, about the woman who's considering that product role as a scary expansion, that's the absolute expansion that we want to see.
Yes.
Because that means you are thinking about the business. Getting into that product experience will change the whole way you look at your company and the whole way you look at what's being built internally. And it's a really good growth thing for that person and for anybody in this role. And then I think everyone on this call has that experience, and it's probably part of why they're sitting in the roles they are right now.
Well, I think that fake it till you make it also is a fantastic way of learning, right? I'm not saying that that's how I currently operate, just for the record, but I may have known someone very close to me that did that throughout their entire career. And if you can learn on the job, I would say, just take the role, both hands, as you said, and ask for help. That's one thing that we forget, is that, like, I call Joe or Vitaly all the time, much to their annoyance, saying, hey, I need help with this or that or whatever. Asking for help and advice is a key part of this job. And I fear that there's this expectation that a leader needs to just know everything off the bat. Like, I joked about HTTPS handshake. I couldn't draw it on a whiteboard either. It's been 20 years since I really looked at it. But I sure know, to Joe's point, that I can go ask help from an engineer, or if there's a complex situation that involves compliance and technology or something like that, I can go ask Vitaly, like, how did you deal with it? Or even organizational designs, things of that nature. So fake it till you make it and ask for help is a key ingredient for growing your career.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, or every point for some of us, we've been given a stretch opportunity, right? We've been put in the roles that we've
Yeah.
never done before, and we had to learn, right? And we had to learn how to fail and fail quick in many cases. The key is to have the right mentors and people that you can reach out to, people like Jim, Joe, you. There's many, many others in the industry that not just are available, they're actually proactively reach out and help and mentor. You also have to be a champion, right, for people in your organization outside to be able actually to step into those roles. So, whether it's fake it until you make it or stretch opportunities, whichever you describe it, we're all been there and we'll continue to do that. So people who are afraid to step up, because it is scary, right? It's a big role. There's a lot of responsibilities. We're here to help. People can always reach out. We have a really big community that's gone through this before many times and are willing to help.
I just remember a conversation I had with Joe, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. We were talking about this one AI security product. And so I was telling Joe that I don't hear from CISO they are wanting to do this because a lot of people think of AI security still in the governance stage. They write a set of policies and let it go. And are they really going to deploy this? And Joe said, well, you're looking at this purely from the corporate enterprise security point of view. You're not looking at this from the product security point of view. And that was like a light bulb went off on top of my head. I'm like, absolutely. You know, if you're a product security, head of product security, or a CISO has that responsibility, then you absolutely would need something like that to secure the services that you provide to your customers with AI as part of that. So that was, that was like my learning from Joe. So you should look at from the different set of lens. But I have to tell you though, fake it until you make it is not for everyone. Some people, especially women that I have seen, and this is not about that, this podcast is a lot of us have trouble faking it. So anyway, so that's for another
Tell me more about that. That's fascinating.
Well, you don't know this because I have this Slack channel with many security leaders who are women, and we talk about a lot of things because it's a safe space. So we talk about things we're not comfortable talking about outside, and a lot of it is about am I qualified for this job? And I hear very, very senior women always have this self-doubt, and the imposter syndrome is real.
Yeah, I'm painfully aware of it. I think it's really valuable to talk about publicly more and more, or else the problem will continue to exist, right?
Yep.
And I appreciate you bringing it up because, as a father of two daughters and one of them wanting to go into the cybersecurity space, part of me is like, wow, that's a hard climb, just based on not only the scope, but the culture is something which is evolving and changing. But, and I'm fully encouraging her to do it. But, there's that part of me is like, yeah, this is a problem that needs to be addressed.
No, it's a really interesting point that because we don't have good structured development programs, we're kind of in a place right now where the people who are rising to the top are the people who are willing to jump into the burning houses.
Yeah.
Chengxi, I think your point about women sometimes being more reluctant has been validated by my experience. I've always tried to have diverse leadership teams and diverse teams as a whole. And one of the things I've noticed with the women who reported to me, they were much more likely to raise a fear of not being technical enough. And I've heard and read those studies that say, a man will look at a job description, and if they meet one of the 5 bullet points, they'll apply. And if a woman meets 4, she won't apply because she's not qualified. I've heard those stories and I've seen it in practice. And so, if we want to evolve this profession to be more diverse, we need to think about these things more intentionally, for sure. I hope we could dedicate a whole session to that topic.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a whole session. So I want to come back to the codifying topic. Is that I want to do a session with you guys at RSA, and perhaps this more structured development. Once we have a framework that codifies the responsibility and the scope of CISO, we can say that maybe healthcare has these 5 components and financial services has 7 components, and some of them overlap, right? But once we have those standard frameworks, perhaps we can work on a more structured development program for junior talent, right?
Yeah, here's an interesting data point on this. There's an organization, a nonprofit called Cyber Future Forum, run by Val Mickey, based in Dallas. And Val, so in the last couple of years, a lot of different people have tried to look and see, could we get specialized insurance for security executives, kind of like the equivalent of D&O, based, because of my experience and Tim's experience at SolarWinds and things like that. That's a whole other conversation. But what Val found when he started trying to go to the insurers was they said, we don't want to create a policy for a role that nobody has a definition of, So like imagine you're the insurance company and you're like, okay, I will protect people in this role. Now describe the role, and nobody can describe the role. So Val, in his quest to kind of get insurance, is essentially starting a association that will have standards to be a quote unquote qualifying security executive in order to get insurance. And to be a qualified executive to get the insurance, I think that's going to be the most interesting conversation that will come out of that whole exercise that Val's leading, because there's 2 sides to it, right? There's what we're talking about. Are you qualified? Like, what are your qualifications, experience, et cetera? But then there's also, are you at an organization that is giving you the resources and the role as it should be? Because you could be the best security person in history, but if you're unfunded and reporting into the janitor, then you shouldn't get the insurance. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Maybe we should have Val on the podcast and one of the
Yep.
future. So I think that would be really interesting. I am aware of that effort, also aware of a few people who are helping. But don't know the specifics. So
Yep.
you guys think it's a good thing to do?
Yeah.
So we are probably good enough for today in terms of our content. There's a lot. I was gonna hit the personal risk side, but it's a whole new conversation. I think maybe warrants a specific discussion. So this is great. I'm gonna stop here.